Okay, so everyone who is in the Zoom room, you know that we are recording right now and we'll have this for posterity. What you're looking at on the screen is what folks are going to be looking at on the Zoom room there. I don't know if I can make this any more zoomed in, although maybe this is it zoomed in enough, do you think? Okay, very good. So folks, thank you for waiting. We were running a little bit late in the room here, but so glad to have you on the Zoom. And I'm going to toss to Preeti, who's going to lead and moderate the panel.
Thank you, Chris. First of all, wow, what a powerful, powerful documentary. Thank you so much to the Ornstein Foundation for developing it. Thank you. And thank you, Friendship Place, for hosting this along with our, partners. And it's been a really interesting. I've been working in the treatment court world for a while now, like 20 some odd years. But it's always like when I see something like this, it's, this personalizes it and it just becomes it to life, because I'm so used to looking at numbers and data that when you see something like this, it's just, it's very powerful. Welcome to American University, to those who are here in person and then joining virtually as well. According to SANSA, National Recovery Month is celebrated in September right now to promote and support new evidence-based treatment and recovery practices. We want to thank the professionals involved in providing prevention and treatment in the behavioral health field. And additionally, we celebrate those who are moving forward in their recovery journey. This documentary is set in Miami-Dade. In fact, the first drug treatment court was formed in Miami-Dade back in 1989. And then the first mental health court itself was also formed in Florida in Broward County in 1989. I'm sorry, no, 1997. 89 was the first treatment court, and then 97 was the first mental health court in Florida. Miami-Dade jail diversion program featured in this documentary was not formed too much later. It was in 2000. And then just to provide you a little bit of context, just the data on mental health court, according to the treatment court data that was collected just recently in 2021, there are over 550 mental health courts in the United States today, with 31 of them in Florida itself. So it's exciting to see Judge Leifman work on doing a statewide initiative for mental health treatment. And then in our local DC metro area, since we're here, I thought I would pull some data. There are approximately 22 mental health courts, one in DC with the judge here, Judge Isco. And then we have 8 in Maryland and 13 in Virginia. So that's the extent of the data you're going to get from me today. I'm Preeti Menon with the American University, your moderator for the evening's panel. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Zephi, my colleague back there who's helped and done a lot of this logistic for the event tonight. He's done a great job. And before I start with the panel discussion, I do want to welcome the panelists and give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So if you could just start and just tell everyone a little bit about your, involvement with mental health in general.
Okay, I'll jump in. I'm Lisa Daly. I'm the Executive Director for Treatment Advocacy Center. We're headquartered in Arlington, Virginia. And our mission is basically to focus on eliminating barriers to treatment for people with severe mental illness.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amber Harding. I'm the director.
Probably just need to get closer.
Need to get closer. Okay, is that better? Okay, hi, everyone. I'm Amber Harding. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless. And I'm just going to give you all the things I don't do. So I am not a mental health professional. I basically work on housing and trying to get more of it and have it be deeply affordable so people aren't homeless anymore. And I started out as a disability rights attorney at the legal clinic, and most of my practice is working with people with serious mental illness.
Hi, I'm Craig Isco. I am the presiding judge of the Superior Court in the District of Columbia's Mental Health Court. I've been a judge on the Superior Court since 2003, and I will say that I feel that the Mental Health Court has done a tremendous amount of good. And as a judge, I feel like I'm doing as much good or more good for the community than in any other position I've ever held. And I know we'll talk later, but homelessness plays a key role in causing mental health problems and exacerbating those problems and in preventing us from addressing those problems. So I applaud Friendship Place and everything that it is doing. And I also want to just finally thank Judy Harris and Norm Ornstein for all they have done for the mental health community and for working to improve mental health nationwide.
Good evening. I'm Jean-Michel Giraud. For those of you don't know me yet, and I'm the president and CEO of Friendship Place. I want to thank AU and the foundation for partnering with us on this wonderful event. And there's so much to be said about what is going on in Miami and what is going on in all the mental health courts. One of the reasons I'm on the panel actually is not because I'm the president of Friendship Place. It's really because I'm a mental health and addiction family member. Some of you know my brother happened to be homeless right here in the district a couple of years before I moved to this country from France. And I'm also certified in psychiatric rehabilitation with the Psychiatric Rehabilitation Association, and happen to have a competency designation in dual recovery. So that's mental health and addiction. And it's good to hear from family members. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be up here with you all experts. And I do have some discussion questions that I'm gonna get started with, but everyone here will have an opportunity, including those who are online. They can put questions in the chat. And if you have a question as we get started, just feel free to come up to one of these mics and just, we'll just get you going. All right, so I'll start, and please, just any one of you chime in. So as evident in the film, viewers are exposed to a historical overview of the criminalization of mental illness. However, the innovation that Jail Diversion Program, JDP, illustrates an example of a shift from that decriminalization. So in places like Miami-Dade and some of the other jurisdictions, what has been the impetus for this new approach to deal with severe mental illness?
Well, I'll jump in first and say that, I really think what we're seeing, and there's more and more of it happening over time, is just kind of a recognition that what we're doing at the moment and what we were doing before we started to focus on programs like this that are outcome-based and that are intended to assist people with what they need in order to succeed, is basically a recognition that what we were doing in criminalizing psychiatric illness and psychiatric symptoms doesn't work. And it's very expensive and it's cruel.
I'll just say very briefly, I can't, of course, speak to Miami-Dade County, but I can say in the District of Columbia, we've recognized jailing people for mental illness does not prevent them from being mentally ill. It does not address their illness. It does not prevent them from committing crimes when they get released. It does nothing to stop the cycle. And so we realize we have to try an approach that addresses the root of the problem, which is the mental illness.
And I agree with the judge that obviously jails are the wrong places for people with mental illnesses to be, right? Because they tend to be stressful places that tend to exacerbate psychiatric symptoms, and where the treatment is not really readily available in a way that's effective. And to me, it all goes back really to deinstitutionalization. And when we started to put people first and realize that people with mental illnesses had to live in conditions that were not substandard and not be subjected to the forms of abuse or neglect that we had in the larger mental health hospitals before we shrunk them down to what they are now. Unfortunately, as you heard in the movie, the institutionalization did not go well everywhere. And in many places, unfortunately, it did not at all, because we have not created enough resources in the community to welcome people with mental illnesses in safe programs where they can thrive.
So there's often stigma also that's attached with mental illness and or homelessness also. like, why do you think that stigma exists? And what can we do to reduce it? In terms of like social issue, in terms of social issues?
I will just say there's always been a stigma about mental illness. I see it in my own court when defense attorneys tell me my client does not want to come into mental health court because the name itself is stigmatizing.
Right.
And we try to come up with a better name. We haven't yet. It's better than mental illness court, but we can't eliminate the stigma. We can work really hard to reduce it. And in our court, we're exploring overall treatment, not just when they come to the mental health court, but the pre-arrest diversion all the way through. And we're coming up with ways to address mental health problems. We're calling it our Committee on Community Wellness to try to take away some of the stigma. But I think we all have to work to reduce that stigma, to say it's a disease that can be treated. It's not your fault. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who has an illness that needs to be treated.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I mean, I think stigma is often about fear, and just fear of being like that other and distancing yourself. And people have that fear even when they are in that category. I mean, that's how stigma works. But I've also seen solutions to the problem that you describe. And when I think about it in the court system, I think there are a lot of people that probably shouldn't be in jail, not just people with mental illness, right? There are a lot of people who commit crimes that we would call like quality of life crimes that they commit because they're poor, and it is criminalized to be poor, to be on the street, to sleep in a tent, to urinate when there are no bathrooms around, right? I mean, one way to handle some of this stigma, and I think some of the issues that you're describing with mental health court, is to like maybe cast a little bit of a wider lens around decriminalization. And I'm just going to give like a school example. This is easiest for me. You think about how there are all these studies that show that kids who are qualified for reduced lunch don't eat them because of the stigma. And the programs where they provide that lunch to everyone work. Just fund it for everyone. People bring their lunch or they don't. You pay for it, you don't. My kids, you don't actually have to show anything when you walk through, and they know who gets federal compensation for reduced lunch and who doesn't at the back, but you don't at the front. And so thinking about like how many times people go to jail for really like low level crimes that actually could use support on a broader scale from either mental health or honestly just meeting their basic needs, you know, sort of providing public benefits, providing access to housing and shelter and food, and how many crimes I'm not going to say we, because I don't enforce these crimes, but the government enforces that really actually could be solved with more of a support lens.
So we actually focus a lot on just making sure that people don't mistake stigma, don't mistake discrimination for stigma, because there's a systemic discrimination that we experience in this society, where we allow healthcare providers in the state and the counties to treat psychiatric illness differently than other health conditions. And I think that's what is at the root of a lot of stigma. If we were able to really do a good job of focusing on preventing that from being a reality, so that people are no longer really kind of allowed by what are a lack of enforcement of parity and things like that, where you really kind of allow systems to act as if there is a reason why you shouldn't really be entitled to good quality care for a psychiatric illness, the same way that you would be for a heart health condition, then we could really start to get at some of the types of stigma and discrimination that have the biggest impact on people.
And of course, the community-based programming is relatively new to us, right? Because a lot of it was developed in the 70s and 1980s. So as a society, all that is relatively new. And I think we're still learning how to work with that. I'm happy to say that when somebody with bipolar disorder commits a crime now, it's not all over the papers for a month the way it was maybe 25 years ago. I think that's progress. And also, it's important to remember that people with mental health diagnosis don't commit any more crime than other people in the general population. But on the other hand, inmates at 50% say that they committed their crimes under the influence. So the two are different. In the family, I think that sometimes there's a form of stigma that's projected toward the person with the diagnosis, in that family members tend, particularly parents, and in my family too, lower the bar for the person. And we need to be careful as family members and people trying to help other people we know, our friends and etc. Not to lower the bar for people. It's not a good thing to do. People should be encouraged to do just as much as they can in life and accomplish as much as they can. On the service provider side, I used to run mental health and dual recovery programs at Alliance in Maryland for 8 years. Always, and the same at Friendship Place, always work on an even plane. And you see that in the movie, right? How comfortable people are with one another, and practitioners, I think, have a responsibility to make sure that happens. And as we say in the field, no rehab from above, right? Nobody is above anybody else in this exchange that creates the rehab intervention that takes place as you explore in the middle, and everybody on an even plane.
No, you're absolutely right, Jean-Michel. So when it comes to like avoiding criminal justice system or getting access to treatment, can you talk about, can you talk a little bit about what challenges are faced by those who are unhoused and have mental illness?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that really does kind of circle back to kind of healthcare discrimination for people that have that status. So, I mean, I can tell you that when I have done projects, you know, kind of mapping where people fall out of the system if they are unhoused and have severe mental illness in, you know, in the DC system, for example, a lot of it happens when somebody goes to the emergency department and then they're discharged almost immediately, because it's kind of recognized that, oh, this is a person who's homeless. There's nothing wrong with them, as if the psychiatric condition doesn't count because the person is homeless. And I think that's a big part of the challenge. Another part of the challenge is, you know, as Judy mentioned, if you don't have insight into the fact that you're experiencing a mental illness, if you don't see that you have an illness, you will not seek treatment. And if your laws are set up so that you have to seek treatment in order to access treatment, you are invisible to the system unless you commit a crime.
Right.
And just to add to that, from a court perspective, if you have somebody in a mental health court and they are homeless, it's very hard to keep them connected to the services, particularly if they're not acknowledging their mental illness. You don't know where they are. They don't know where they will be day to day. You can't, they can't get the treatment. Their supervision officer who's trying to help them graduate from the program is working with them, can't track them down, and sleeping on the street. They're not getting good sleep. They're not getting good nutrition. They're only going to deteriorate. So having a place to live is key to many people to recovery. And from a judicial perspective, it can be heartbreaking that somebody who's been making good progress becomes homeless. Sometimes a family member will say you can't live in the home anymore, or they will lose their benefits, or they won't be able to pay their rent. They become homeless, and then their good progress declines, and then you lose them. They disappear from the system until the next time they commit an offense.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's hard to get connected when you're on the street. It's hard to take your medicine when you're on the street, or even access medicine. Things get lost and stolen. Food is an issue. And then you're out, for people who are living on the street, you're out in public and more likely to have the police called on you for your psychiatric behaviors than I am in my house, right? I mean, and sometimes even when there aren't any psychiatric behaviors, you're getting the police called on you, because people often just want people on the street not to be seen. And so they call the cops, and cops, I mean, I was really impressed with, how they were saying the number of incidents of police violence or shootings went down. But for me, the best approach is just to limit the amount of interactions with police. They rarely go well for people with mental illness. And I think it can be triggering for people with mental illness to have someone who, has a gun, or someone is coming into the situation with a lot more power. And that can happen in shelters too. Even people in shelters often leave because of their mental illness, and because shelters are often run with a lot of rules, a lot of other people around that can prompt arguments and fights and police getting called. And so, I mean, and that's on sort of the single side. For families, you have to be careful about showing those symptoms of mental illness, or your kids will get taken away. So there's a whole nother element to that. And seeking treatment as a head of household when you have minor children is incredibly limiting, because you really can't do residential treatment programs for substance abuse or mental health. And because there aren't programs that treat that sort of serve the whole family, you'd have to separate from your children in order to do it. So there are all these barriers in place, particularly for people who live either on the street or in shelters where there might be strict rules, where even in a family shelter, they might not be willing to let your sister come take care of your kids while you go into treatment, because only you can be in that shelter and you can't have other people watch your kids. So those are some of the things that I think that are sort of rules that could be modified, but that there were people feel deterred from seeking treatment because of the situations they're in.
And in homeless services, we've also come to the recognition that housing is a medical intervention, because without housing, you can't have holistic services, wraparound services all the way, obviously. And as Amber said, it's really hard to take your medication on a regular basis when you're on the street. They come in bottles. Often people organize them in 7-day planners, little plastic planners, and very hard to keep that going on the street, even though it's simple. You can also lose or have your medicines or have them stolen in a bag. At Friendship Place, for those of you who don't know, we run a psychiatric clinic every Thursday afternoon. And it's one of the programs that we support out of private funds, because as we've been doing it now for 31 years in Upper Northwest, we do see people who just walk in. And that's an amazing thing, this opportunity. Once somebody walks in for the first time, because the symptoms are just really getting to them, and to have this opportunity to serve that person that afternoon is great. Because if you don't, that person may, and you tell them we don't have that resource, we're going to send you across the city, we may lose an opportunity to serve that person. They may just walk away. So, to make care available whenever possible and with no barrier is really important. And the right care, you heard about, how well some people are trained in the field, how well, maybe less well other people are. And by the way, we use housing first. So they use an abstinence model, obviously. And it's a great program they have. I was very impressed with the fact that everybody does seem to work together. And there is this feeling that even the judge, she sounds more like a therapist some days, right? Which is great. We use a housing first model, so people can use drugs and alcohol in their apartments. It's a whole totally different model that in the end we found out works just as well as the old abstinence model, but it removes the barriers and we're not leaving anybody behind. We used to have to ask somebody, for instance, if they had used substances way a long time ago, and if they had in the last 180 days, we couldn't get them into the apartment. Now we do, and we give people the recovery tools they need to, and people make their own decisions. But we're finding that the number of people engaging in mental health and addiction treatment went right back to where we were when we were in the abstinence model in the mid-70s. And so the model is working.
Let me just pick up on one of the comments that the judge can sound like a therapist. And it's true, the judge plays a very different role in any treatment court. the judge plays a different role. What I tell people in my court is, unlike almost any other court in the country, in a mental health court, everybody in the court is rooting for you to succeed, not just the defense attorney, but also the prosecutor and the judge, and tell them, we all want you to succeed. We are on your side. You have to do the hard work, the heavy lifting, but we want you to succeed, and we will help you succeed. We will give you the resources to help you. And just that kind of support is something that many people have never had in their lives. We need a lot more to prevent people from having to come to mental health court in the first place. And that's what a lot of what we're talking about. But once they get there, you can make a positive difference by doing that. And it's nice to be able to play that different role. And let me just comment on one other thing before I forget. You saw that graduation certificate at the end. You would be shocked at how much many of the graduates of the program value that certificate. It means an incredible amount to them. I had somebody recently who came back to court, contacted my chambers and said, my 3-year-old daughter tore up my certificate. Can I get a new one? And of course you can get a new one, but it meant that much to him that he wanted that back right away. And for many people, it's the first positive affirmation they've got in a long time, and particularly from a court system that has previously not rewarded them in any way.
I've had an opportunity to attend some of the graduations, and it's very emotional. It's very emotional. It's very powerful. So, Jean-Michel, you spoke about like Friendship Place and the role that you play in terms of like housing first, which I think is great. And then in the documentary, we saw how law enforcement works with, the crisis intervention team and program, and then training law enforcement and how to interact with individuals experiencing mental illness. How else, like, have you seen people with severe mental health being connected to services like that they need?
Well, please,
go
go.
ahead.
No, you start. Go ahead.
I mean, my organization focuses on trying to prevent people from reaching mental health court by ensuring that there's access to care, even for people who won't seek it voluntarily. So we spend actually quite a lot of our time and effort working on civil commitment laws to make sure that they're actually able to get to people on the civil side, so that it doesn't require that somebody commit a crime to get into the system. And that if you enter the hospital, that they're looking at, is this person dangerous to themselves or to others? And what does that mean? That doesn't just mean that you might be suicidal or that you might be homicidal. It also means that you can't take care of yourself because you're very vulnerable or you're not aware of what's going on around you. So we try to focus very much on trying to get people care within the medical and treatment systems before it reaches the criminal courts. And I will say that the criminal courts, like, being active in this is just as important. You have to come at it from both sides, but don't ever neglect the idea that these are things that should be happening well before somebody is so sick that they're committing a crime and ending up in the criminal justice system. And we'd like to really see more of that.
So just a quick follow-up question to that, like how do you assess someone if someone's like in homeless population? Like, how do you like determine that this person?
Well, it depends where you are, because all of the states are running their own experiment on what
Right.
that actually means.
Okay.
But generally speaking, the basic criteria that they follow in all places is that, you can intervene to get somebody into care, or at least to have them evaluated if they seem to present a danger to themselves or to someone else. And it's where those things are defined that it differs from place to place. But, for the population that we're talking about, so when you're talking about people who are unhoused, you're really talking about people who meet a harm to self criteria for being gravely disabled. Basically, somebody who's not able to meet their basic needs and not able to protect themselves from harm. And that's, we focus a lot on trying to make sure that those definitions are inclusive of people who really are not in a position to protect themselves from harm. I mean, I think sometimes it's easy to forget how uniquely vulnerable people are who are on the street and in psychosis.
I'm not sure how like philosophically aligned we are on this. I want to tease this out a little bit because I worry that when we're talking about people, I don't say the words again that you used. It was
Greatly disabled.
not being able to
Oh, to
care-
protect yourself from harm.
to
or meet
protect your
basic needs.
or meet your basic needs. I mean, by definition, people who are homeless often cannot meet their basic needs. And so I think, but that is because the system has failed them and failed to provide those needs. So, you know, I have worked with very, very, very mentally ill people and have seen what happens when they get into housing. And I'm sure Jean-Michel has as well. And the huge difference that makes, even in their just mental health, even in the expression of those symptoms. And I, as a lawyer and a civil rights lawyer, I'm so super reluctant to get to the place where we take away anyone's individual liberties. And I really think it has to be like the absolute last resort. So I just would love to have a system where like, we are actually like trying to meet people's basic needs first. I know I sound like a dreamer, but like really like meeting people's basic needs should be our first priority. And honestly, going into a hospital and someone saying, like you said, housing is healthcare. This is the intervention that is needed. This person needs food, they need medical care, they need psychiatric treatment, they need housing. And having a system that we can actually provide all those things feels like it would decrease the number of people that I think get to what you're talking about.
I just want to snarkily say that I'm also a civil rights lawyer. Also a civil rights lawyer.
Judge,
Good
did you
evening,
wanna say something?
everyone. I'm not sure.
It is on, yeah.
Oh, great.
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to everyone for being here. I was trying not to say anything this evening, but of course, the subject has come up of personal rights when it comes to people experiencing homelessness. Now, what I'm going to say are the feelings of Alan Banks and not anyone I work for or partner with or anything like that. But we in this country, we leave out the most vulnerable mentally ill people who are on the street simply because they have the right. And I don't want to argue with you. I feel where you're coming from, really do. But simply because they have the right to say no, they get to stay on the street. And I'm talking about people who don't have the mental capacity, which I've heard one of the panelists say, they don't have the mental capacity to make the correct decisions that are best for themselves. But because of where we are in this country, they can say no and stay on the street. We can watch them deteriorate every day until they go away. I used to have a problem saying things like this until I came to the realization that these things were about me. I'm one of the people in America who has experienced homelessness. I spent 3 years on the streets of Washington, D.C., wandering the streets, looking like something that escaped from somewhere. That should not have been allowed. I was seen, but because in this country, I wasn't threatening anyone or myself, I was allowed to stay out there. I spent 2 winters on the streets of DC, and the third winter finally drove me inside. Now that's my story. I want to tell you the next part, and then I'll shut my face. There was a woman who rode the bus on Wisconsin Avenue. This woman was severely in trouble, severely ill. She had a stench on her from wearing urinated clothes for weeks. The bus drivers wouldn't let her on the bus. Our people knew who she was or know who she is. I don't know. The last time I saw her was up Tinleytown by the old Best Buy on a February freezing 22-degree morning, curled up in the corner with no coat on. I don't know whether she was dead or alive. I didn't mess with her because I didn't want to find a body. but I will tell you, I've never seen her since. Now, I'm not standing here this evening telling you I have the answer to this situation, because I don't. But we cannot be in here this evening and say the answer is people get to die on the street because it's their right to do so. I thank y'all for letting me get that out, and I thank you for letting me share it.
Thank you, Alan. And Alan is on the Friendship Place staff as a development associate, also runs our Speakers Bureau. And thank you for sharing, Alan.
Could I just add a quick word to that? And I can't thank you enough for talking to us and being our friend. And thank you so much. But I was on the board of the ACLU for many years. My son was represented in thwarting my attempt to get him help by an ACLU attorney. It's complicated. I've practiced law for 50 years in the District of Columbia. It's by far the hardest problem that I've ever confronted in any way. But when I do some public speaking or writing, I always say that my son died alone in a hotel room, scattered with his civil rights and civil liberties all over the floor. My son was the opposite of the experience you talk about. He had resources. He had many, many houses, actually, that we begged him to stay in. So it's not a simple problem. It's not restricted to one economic strata or another. That's why I spoke about anosognosia when I made my first few remarks. And it is my deepest hope and will be my work for the rest of my life to see if I can bring you two ladies together. I'm talking metaphorically, of course, to find the intersection of where we can agree. And personally, I believe it's those people on the streets, even in the hotel rooms. People are dying in those situations all the time. They have a roof over their head. Our son had access to money. That wasn't the problem. He did not know he was ill. He believed that what he was doing was what he needed to do to have his soul returned to him. So my life's work for whatever years I have left is going to try and be to sell our whole population on trying to find that little bit of intersection in the Venn diagram where we can agree that some people do need us to step in as a caring society and get them the help that they really don't understand themselves that they need. And thank you for letting me give that little speech.
And I'll just say, I 100% actually agree with both of you. I don't think it, first of all, it is not simple. It is complicated. It is emotional. And I think that I'm not sure we disagree that much about it, because I think what I was saying was I worry about that definition being too expansive. That's what I'm saying. I am not saying no one should ever be committed. I'm saying I worry, I always am looking out for those things that serve as proxies for lack of money or proxies for homelessness and things that we can fix other ways. And we cannot fix serious, debilitating mental illness with some of the tools I'm talking about. But I just want to be careful. And I trust that she is. But when she was talking about these definitions, I imagine there are places that do have pretty expansive definitions because of discrimination, because of stigma, because of myths and stereotypes that people with mental illness are dangerous, versus actually looking at the person in front of them and making sure that that person in their individual situation needs that treatment. I think that's the point that I was hoping to make.
I wanted to say I appreciate the points this speaker, Mr. Banks, brought up, and it reminded me I should have given my disclaimer that the views I express are my own and not those of the Superior Court. So I always appreciate a good disclaimer, but and I want to say,
I should say Mr. Banks is also on our board. So that might be why he felt he needed to make a disclaimer there.
what Judy said is quite complicated. And from the court's perspective, and what I do, I follow the laws and I can't go beyond that. But just some observations. Obviously, providing housing for the homeless is critical. I think what's also critical is providing mental health services early so that people don't devolve into homelessness. And we need to start with children who are affected by trauma, who are seeing family members be victims of violent crime, see family members commit violent crime, seeing horrible fights, have family members who are addicted to drugs or alcohol, and get intervention for them. These children have mental health problems that they develop through no fault of their own, because people don't develop these problems. It's not their fault that they develop them, but you need intervention early. The earlier you can get it, the better. And the statistics in the movie about how much it costs to house somebody in a mental hospital versus jail, it costs even less to provide those mental health services before they get to that point. And I think we neglect that too much, and we need to work to provide easy access and to reduce the stigma so people can take advantage of that access.
So the debates are complicated on the mental health system, and I realize that. And I do think we could do a lot more to intervene on the street with qualified people. And, we have a team at Friendship Place doing that. The city has a mental health team, etc., ACT teams. The system in general could be better funded. And as constituents, it's all our duty to make sure that this funding keeps coming every year, but also that it's used effectively, right? At Friendship Place, we like to say we have effective and cost-effective services, right? You have to be able to show results in order to accept funding and do right. Housing is important. We could end homelessness in this country if we just set our minds on doing that. It's not a huge budget compared to the other. Think of your least favorite federal budget, and then what it would take to solve homelessness by building enough housing is a lot less, and it would have to be repeated year after year, because we fell through the cracks during the Reagan administration and forward. The city here is doing a lot. Just think of what housing means to somebody who's simply been homeless or homeless with a mental illness. The first day you get your key and you get to lock that door behind you in your own apartment. And now this is your safe space to get better in. Picture yourself that we do that every night. We have our safe space. So it's huge. And then one more quick comment on the mental health system. We have to stop to treat and street. That's the expression we use in mental health. These units that turn people around. In Maryland, when I worked for Alliance, we worked with a local hospital. The head psychiatrist would take pride in the fact that he turned his beds around in 36 hours, less than 2 days. So you, pardon the expression, but you load people up with medications and then you release them on the street. Of course, they're feeling better when they leave the unit, right? Maybe they're not feeling much, and it's a terrible thing. So we need more of the right beds also. The new St. E's is a nice facility. We need more of those. It's a balance. We don't want to go back to the institutions, that's for sure, but we need more quality beds. If you remember the issue with the politician in Virginia whose son died.
Predates.
The family, and I heard it on the news and it rang a bell, obviously, was looking for a bed the last couple of weeks. They really needed a bed, a place to be where this young person would be safe. And there was nothing around, and that's a problem.
And so it looks like we have one more question. And then Zephyr, is there anyone in the chat group asking a question? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name's Amanda, and I live here in the neighborhood, and I'm also a landlord. I have 10 tenants at any time. God has blessed me with luck. And many of them are coming from homeless situations, and many of them have these amazing things that you're talking about, but many of them can't handle it. And I'm not here to be bad. I'm here to say I try to help them. I know all of my tenants, and I've had the system fail me. And I also represent, like, I'm not representing, I'm on a council of landlords that have like hundreds or thousands of apartments. Train us on what to do. Tell us how to get them there. I tried to get my tenant to see someone like you. I didn't know it existed. I told the general counsel of his social work agency, they're like, you can't do anything. There's nothing you can do. Okay, that's great. He attacked 2 people in my apartment after 4 years of living there chill. So that's what I mean. It was a complete surprise, but he couldn't get into a residential facility. He couldn't get his medication changed, nothing. This is just an example. We need support. And I think landlords can really be a good frontline place to help keep these people housed. And I mean, and I have other examples as well. Most of my tenants are great. I've been doing this for 6 years myself. But I've had 3 along the way, and they all needed support. And I tried to reach out to all of them. DC Housing Authority is not equipped at all. They never answer the phone. I work with social work agencies, and I'm told, oh, nothing. I called DC Behavioral Health, and they're like, well, they're working with the social work agency. There's nothing we can do. Nothing but walls everywhere for me. And I'm representing, I would love to have anybody here tell me how to do something different. We can get you in front of landlords that represent hundreds of doors with people who are formerly homeless. And this is a huge problem. It's going to be even bigger because we are housing a lot of homeless people right now in DC with the help voucher program, which is amazing, but we need help. Thank you. By the way, I love the voucher program. It's such a win-win. I love to get my tenants in. I've got 2 people moving in this week. Excited.
Can you, when we're done, talk to me? Because it kind of depends on what program they're in. So, but you know, offline, let's talk about it, and I can maybe help you like figure out some of the chain of command in the programs. The part of the problem is like we have, I don't know how many different voucher programs that people are in who all have services through either like nonprofits or straight through an agency or a different agency or maybe a different agency. And sometimes like they have like 5 people.
Like I'm on a partner, the community partnership is hosting this landlord committee, and there's about 20 of us who
Okay.
really care about these topics. So maybe that's a really cool place to start. And
Yeah.
that'd be awesome to have you guys as a guest speaker sometime. We get on a Zoom call on Thursdays once a month and try and talk this out and make the system better.
Okay.
I just want to say that you could substitute landlord for parent or sibling or anyone. And like, I am thrilled that you want to be part of the solution. I just want to point out that there are so few solutions for people to avail themselves of. And we have a system that doesn't connect to itself. So it doesn't operate like we have a bunch of things and they don't function as a system. And this is a problem. I just want to highlight that the issue that you're facing is absolutely something that everybody identifies. And we have not figured out what to do about it, but it's definitely like not having somebody that you can call because you see someone in trouble and they're not in enough trouble, or they haven't committed a crime, or they haven't attempted suicide or anything like that. Like that's a problem. That's a problem. And it's something that might require a legislative fix.
I just also wanted to tell everybody here that our foundation works very closely with a psychologist named Dr. Javier Amador, who may help in terms of learning about how to best sort of communicate with people when they're in crisis, when they're suffering from anosognosia. He has a book that is called "I'm Not Sick, I Don't Need Help." Is that correct?
Yep.
I'm not saying I don't need help. And they also, in his organization, also teaches trainings, and that might be another resource.
And they are at that really wonderful nexus between coercive care and convincing somebody to try to receive care. It's not one or the other, it's both.
Oh, do you want to go ahead of me, George? And then I have a couple of questions from the chat. Go right ahead first.
I want to say something that's a little off topic. Number one, I think what you're doing is spectacular. I didn't know about the Miami program. I have spent my life in law enforcement. I was warden of the Massachusetts State Prison. I taught for 2 years here. I have a master's in correctional administration from AU. I was the Deputy Associate Attorney General of the United States. I have written more than a little bit on solitary confinement, which is cruel and unusual punishment. And I would suggest that any of your intake people, if you are dealing with people who have done state or federal time, you need to ask them whether they ever were assigned to solitary confinement, because there is nothing which will trigger mental illness faster than that.
And solitary confinement is one of the reasons that you can trot out as the number one compelling reason why you can't criminalize mental illness. Because if you think about what happens when a person is arrested, and it's primarily because of mental illness, if they end up in the criminal justice system, if they get convicted, they are almost certainly going to end up in solitary confinement for their own protection. So, I mean, and it is so bad, and it makes your illness so much worse that if there's anything that you can do to avoid that, you have to.
I should mention one other thing. Virginia just dealt with this. They changed the name from solitary confinement to another name. It's the same thing.
That sounds like Virginia.
I'll read one comment from the chat and then a question from the chat. I think this conversation is ignoring the elephant in the room in terms of race. And so I don't know if anyone wants to comment specifically on that, and then I'll ask one or two other questions from the chat.
I mean, that's certainly, I don't want to take up all of the opportunities to talk here, so I'll keep it very brief, but that is 100% true, that people need to always be thinking about overlapping disparities, and the fact that the disparities that people of color are facing just as people of color is radically compounded when you add the problems that you face as a person with SMI. They're not the same. I mean, a person doesn't encounter the same issues in the same way if they're also experiencing, it's different for women. It's different for people of color. It's different from people that also have, who are on the spectrum in addition to having an illness. It's something that people are just starting to focus on. And I just 100% agree that it's something that needs to be a part of the calculus for all solutions.
And I'll just add to that, in DC, 88% of people who are homeless are Black. So, I mean, homeless is, and I forget the general population, it hovers around 50%. So clearly, completely disparate in the homeless population. And I just want to echo that, many people who are homeless do have physical health disabilities, mental health disabilities, are often people of color, almost exclusively people of color. And, you add in, gender, transgender, and, many other, like you said, being a woman of color, like all those things definitely affect it, but it also affects, again, getting back to the root of what we were talking about, how police interact with people. Like all that bias is also built in there, and then how the criminal justice system works or doesn't work for people with those marginalized identities.
And I'll just say quickly, I think judges in the entire legal system have an obligation to consider how race, gender, sexual identity, trans issues, all of that can affect everything the court system does.
Yes, and there's no doubt when we look at our prison population in the US, that it's in majority people who are Black and brown, and that's something that should tell us something about, what we're doing in the courts. And then, of course, 3 strikes and you're out. You still have some people, who were sent away for practically something that was really irrelevant and completely unfair. Moms, dads, and we just had our training series yesterday, a session on white supremacy and white nationalism, and how they've impacted our laws, but also our practices in the courts. And just like a lot of the other countries, we have a lot to look at. We can't undo our history, but our history comes with a lot of healing to do. And in order to heal, you have to change the future. And that we can do. That's why it's so important to have these conversations. At Friendship Place, we have an anti-racism task force. So if you're interested in joining, please let me know. We also have an LGBTQ plus inclusion work group working in both directions. It's really important to have the conversations and to talk about what's going on out there in our society.
And I'll just add, for treatment courts in general, Zeph and I, our team worked here at AU to develop a racial and ethnic disparities program assessment tool for treatment courts that's in use right now. We worked on 3 statewide initiatives. And we just found out today that we received additional funding to continue that work with Department of Justice. And within that new funding, we have a deliverable to create a specific mental health court track so that mental health courts can look at their programs and policies and procedures and assess, how they can better service the, different populations.
Well, you may have just set up the next question, which is for how does someone who's not in the DMV get their state to start a mental health court?
Oh.
Well, it depends on where you are, which is always the case with everything related to mental health issues. So in Virginia, you actually have to petition to start a docket. That was recently done in Arlington. So that is actually kind of set up through their judiciary. A lot of times it's as simple as a judge deciding that they want to run a docket and that they want to do that. But it really depends very much on where you are. And my recommendation would be to contact, either your state bar association or your judicial association to kind of ask, and somebody will know what you have to do.
Yeah. And I'll say each state has a statewide treatment court coordinator, so they can reach out to that person. The information is online on, oh my gosh, is it ndcrc.org? All the, the information is listed, the contact information for those folks. So if you are in a state where you are interested in opening a specialized treatment court, whether it's mental health, veterans treatment, juvenile treatment. In fact, there's juvenile mental health courts, and I didn't give the statistics earlier, but there are 50 juvenile mental health treatment courts in the United States. So they do exist as well. But if you reach out to your statewide coordinator, they could help get that going.
The National Association of State Courts might also be a useful resource.
Yes.
They've been
Oh,
very
yeah.
helpful.
Absolutely.
I'd
Oh.
just like to add, the beauty of the Miami-Dade model is not just having a court, it's the wraparound services. There are a lot of places that have mental health courts with judges who are not like Craig Isco, who don't understand. And you can have somebody come in who's got a severe mental illness who can present beautifully at that particular moment, and they just don't understand what any of that means. And if you just have a court and you don't have all of those services, and that includes the peer counselors, as you saw what Steve called the secret sauce, the mental health professionals, the social workers, people who can follow along, and the housing, then you're not necessarily going to make it work. And what I think you need to do, and we're taking this film around the country and trying to spread best practices, you need a champion. The best champion is a judge who wants to pull all the different services together because people listen to a judge and not to others. But it's also important to emphasize that when you do this, you save money, even as you're saving lives.
Right.
And that's just not well understood. People think that it's just diverting money from other things. So we have to go beyond just a mental health court.
And it's not well promoted. Like, people don't talk about, like, this is the, the cost savings or the cost benefit analysis. If you do that and you show people numbers, they'll come along. So it's 8:10. We'll do one more question, and then I would like the panelists to give one call to action to our audience on how they can support mental health and homelessness. Go ahead.
So this was kind of answered a little bit, but one question I had was what the roadblocks are to having more mental health courts. But furthermore, why are not all courts addressing mental health? Right? And I mean, maybe that's a silly question because that's the
Right,
problem with
no.
the system, but like,
Yeah.
it initially when the video started, I was like, wait, I thought all courts did this. And then, we come to
Right,
find out
right.
that's not really the case.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we can all use mental health.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then another comment I just wanted to make is that, I have a daughter who's in school, and I'm just amazed by the fact that schools actually do care about emotional well-being with children. That's not something that existed 35 years ago when I was in school. Like, that was not anything.
Mhm.
And so that's the beginning of it. And I mean, obviously we need to address it at the current level where people are, but it starts in our schools.
Right.
So
I'll just say, I think the difference is like overall mental health, like the way we're looking at it with our kids or our communities versus like diagnosed mental illness. But I'll let one of you speak to that.
I mean, in my view, the reason that you have this issue is because, as was discussed earlier, it's an adversarial system. Our criminal justice system is set up so that you have a judge as an umpire, and then you have two lawyers who have different positions who are fighting it out. And that doesn't work for this issue. So this is why collaborative courts developed differently and why they operate differently. But a lot of it is just because it's ending up in criminal courts. That's why it's happening. I mean, a civil court doesn't actually operate that way. When you, like if you go before, so these are often handled in probate court. If you have like a civil commitment issue or a guardianship issue, that isn't necessarily handled as an adversarial situation. A lot of times it is more of a problem-solving approach. But when something gets to the point where it enters the criminal justice system, it runs up against the system that it's in. And those are some of the limitations of the criminal justice system.
I just want to comment on the earlier comment that the Miami system is exceptional. It typically in a system, and the folks I used to work with in Maryland, many had probation officers, and it's a totally different relationship because that officer is in charge of your freedom. If you don't comply, that person can violate you, and that's what the participants would say, meaning that that person can send you back to jail. And you can't imagine the difference between the system we've just watched and the feeling for somebody who is rather fragile with their freedom, fragile with their recovery, to think that one person has the power to violate me, to send me back to jail. And so we need to look at that wider in this country.
Just say quickly, the Miami-Dade model is the dream of many mental health court judges, and it's a wraparound service. It has the pre-arrest diversion, and I would personally, I'm not speaking for my court, like to see other courts be able to follow that model. It saves money eventually, but it's very expensive initially, and that's always an issue. But I'm making a visit to see Judge Leifman and view that court in a few weeks, together with many members of our broader court community, including representatives, U.S. Attorney's Office, pretrial services, all the Department of Behavioral Health, all the groups that work on that, because the solution isn't in mental health courts. The mental health courts help, but the solution, as I said, has to start early, has to provide services all the way through, and try to divert people from the criminal justice system throughout that process.
If I could also just very briefly answer the question about why all courts aren't. I'm really happy to.
Judy, can you use the mic for the folks online?
Time in the history of the national, what is it, state court?
Negotiation of state courts.
Association
Yeah.
of State Courts, they have adopted mental health as the issue that they want to solve. And we met Judge Isco recently at a regional meeting of the state courts where we had taken the movie and where Judge Leifman appeared. It is going to every single regional meeting of the judiciary across the country. We are very close to releasing a report that the state courts have developed with their dream vision of what they in the judiciary would like to see, the powers they would like to have, the changes to the laws, the support, the breaking down of the silos. And we're very excited. I've been working on that task force for about 2.5 years now. We're really almost there, and I'm very excited about that. And it's going to be great.
So do we have a call to action?
I mean, our call to action, I would just recommend that you follow and like sign up for mailing lists for all of the, mental health advocacy organizations that are in your state, in your area. Certainly sign up for our mailing list. We always put out information about laws that are going, that are going to be debated that you might want to have an opinion about, and why, we put out reports that kind of identify specific issues that might be actionable, things that might make things better. And I recommend that people do that. I mean, if you're engaged and you know what's being considered, you can make your thoughts known about where you think things should be and what you expect as a community. And then I guess the overall call to action, I would say, is like, demand more. Our system is absolute crap. I mean, it's ridiculous that we accept this for any part of our healthcare system, but certainly for something that affects this many people in our country. I mean, nobody thinks this is a good system. You couldn't really build one that worked worse if you were trying to do it. We cannot accept that.
I think my advice would be similar, which is like, get involved in groups, because change takes time, and having people in a coalition with you, having people who have different skills and different expertise can make that change more likely to happen. And I always tell people this, but like, pay attention to what's happening around you in your community at like a deeper level. DC has an issue where we sort of have a one-party system. So everyone thinks like, well, they're Democrats, but there's a range among Democrats, right? So you need to pay attention to like, how are people voting? And then you need to pay attention to, you raise that concern with the Department of Behavioral Health, and what happened? And then you need to follow up and follow up and follow up the chain of command. And I mean, not everyone has time to do that, but that's why I think joining groups, finding organizations that align with your values, getting on those listservs. I think the most actually important thing is having someone who's identifying this thing's about to happen. We need you to pay attention, because like you're not going to have that much time in your life to be constantly like looking up all the pending legislation. There are groups that professionally do this that you can sort of lean on a little bit to digest it for you, but then go testify about it. Like, go get engaged, call your elected representatives. I don't know, not everyone who's watching this or is here is in DC, but so much of this is local. It's not federal. We don't have, unfortunately, a vote in Congress, but we do have 13 council members and a mayor who work for us. And so I think just getting more engaged in that is what it takes to make a difference.
As a judge, I can't lobby and I can't endorse particular calls for action, but there have been a lot of organizations mentioned. If you believe those organizations are doing good things, support those organizations. If you have other beliefs, support those organizations, but work to improve the system. That's my advice on a macro level. On a micro level, and I don't think we want to ignore that, if you see somebody that may be in the need of mental health services, do what you can to make those services available to them. It's not going to solve the problem nationwide, but it can have a real impact on a particular individual's life. And, we're taking baby steps. We all need to work to do as much as we can to help improve the mental health of the community and to help prevent homelessness.
I want to thank you all for coming, and of course, and for supporting Friendship Place and the foundation and the EU again. Thank you so much. It's great to connect. Continue to support and love people who have mental health diagnoses around you, and to connect with people who do. It's really important. This mental health, community that some of us are a part of is really important. I want to leave you with one final thought, though. We have more people institutionalized now than when we started deinstitutionalization, which led to the closing of many state schools and state hospitals. So let's start conversations about the second deinstitutionalization movement that will bring people out of incarceration, because that's where this very high number of people are sitting now. And let's start conversations about a second deinstitutionalization movement that will bring people out of incarceration and give them their freedom back, people who should not be in jail. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to thank again the Ornstein Foundation and the Friendship Place for, coming together on this, and all of you panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you to the Ornstein Foundation, to AU, to all of our panelists. Jessica, did you want to say any closing words, or you feel? Well, thank you everyone for being here in the room. Oh, see, there we go. We'll use the microphone. Come on up.
To our virtual and our in-person audience, but anybody who is interested in showing the movie should feel free to email me, Jessica, JESSICA @MORNSTEIN.org. I will respond to your email.
Thank you. And we have our annual breakfast, our Friends and Neighbors Breakfast on October the 20th. If you don't already plan on, if you have not told us you're planning to attend, please email me or Chris Kerner, and you'll find you've been getting emails from me. You have my email address. So everyone knows what my email address is. But again, thank you. And also thank you to, we had at its height something like 30 people online too, which is phenomenal. So we had something like 80 people on a Thursday evening to hear about an important topic. So we should be able to save the recording if I've done this correctly. And so good night. We'll send a copy out to everybody, or a link to everybody once we've figured it out. So thank you.